All right. Let's begin this morning. Let me just quick mic check, I guess, and quick presentation check. Let me just know in the chat if everyone can see and if everyone can hear me. But good morning, everyone. For us, it's morning. Sorry, I'm on the East Coast. My name is Dan Giordano. I work on the product marketing team right here at Gatsby. I am accompanied this morning by Joel Smith, our esteemed director of product, and directly on the team that helped launch our new functions capability, which is exactly what we'll be talking about today. Just quick housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded. And we'll send an email in the next 48 hours with the copy of that. So if you have to drop off or anything, we'll still be able to get it to you. But we will be answering questions live, so feel free to drop questions in the questions tab, not the chat tab. It's much easier for us to go through. But please feel free to drop your questions there. We'll answer them throughout the talk today, but also hopefully get to them at the end. If we don't have time, which we should, we will definitely make sure to either answer on Twitter publicly, or we'll get back to everyone on the email server, which we've been doing lately for webinars, which has been great. All right, so what we're covering today, we're going to be going over basically the ins and outs of serverless functions. What are they? The benefits of them, what you can actually do with them, some use cases. And then we're going to be looking about how they work in Gatsby, on Gatsby Cloud. And then Joel will be walking us through a cool little demo live of actually seeing them fire off. All right, so quick ad read on Gatsby. Gatsby has been around for 6 years now, almost. We have over, I think we crossed about 50 million downloads. And Gatsby is a front-end framework that builds static generated sites that are fast, secure, and now they're dynamic with the launch of our functions capability. We have Gatsby Cloud. Gatsby Cloud is the best way to build, preview, and host your Gatsby website. Gatsby Cloud is a CI/CD engine unified with a edge hosting network. So you'll be able to get the quickest build times and also the fastest deployments to our edge network that runs on the powerful Fastly network that can be accessed all around the globe in just milliseconds. All right, so let's get into it. Joel, what are serverless functions? We have a slide here that I think we can really go through what was before, what was after with serverless. And we'll start with the monolithic application, how it dealt with servers. I think this is a really good frame of reference to go through. But with monolithic application, it was basically you had your entire app stacked up in one server. All your API, all your calls, anything that you were doing would have to make a round trip back to the server. And if you wanted more power, if you had to upscale on resourcing, you just kind of added on to that monolithic server, right? You just put more power into that one server. It did everything for you. Your entire application served the website, your app was connected to it, there was payment on it. Everything was just in one. If it failed, it failed. Again, if it's scaled, you really had to do it vertically in one monolithic system. Microservices were kind of the next evolution there. They've been around now for a good decade, I think. But this was kind of the next paradigm in breaking apart that monolithic. Microservices started to take larger tasks and larger sections of your application and stuck them into one kind of piece of functionality. So let's say all of your chat app or all of your payment stuff, they would all be in one container and one microservice that you could work on individually, but they were still connected to other things. The kind of gluing together all these, this is where Docker, Kubernetes comes into mind. You started to get from herding cats or herding pets to herding cattle, but we had a lot of microservices just hanging around containing this functionality. And then really next we have functions and functions as a service. I think this is the last frontier here, where each individual kind of piece of functionality, so sending the email, not just the entire email client that was reading off a contact list and then had the chat widget. This is individual functionality. So handling the payment, scheduling each individual shipment, updating a customer dashboard after that. These are all granular functions. And you'll see from Joel's demo that it all is run on the front end in code. All right, so what are the benefits of serverless functions? Joel and I will talk about this. I think the first one is up for him, but
Mhm.
security, scalability, affordability, productivity. Those are the four things we're going to be talking about today in regards to why teams are moving away from holding their own servers, from having microservices into this kind of functions as a service world, or as we call it, functions on Gatsby Cloud.
Yeah. So one of the key benefits when I was first I kind of came up as a front end and full stack developer, and when I started to see kind of like framework baked API functions, serverless functions baked in, one of the questions I started asking myself was like, well, how is this really different than calling client side code? Like, why do I need to route if I'm just kind of piping together a bunch of services? Can I do that from the front end? And the real like for me difference, the key value in using serverless functions is actually security. Meaning, if I'm running all of my functions, or if I'm running all of my API calls from the client, that means I have to somehow figure out how to securely store my API keys on the client. And that's no good, right? Like, I don't want to be storing my secrets, my tokens in client-side code, even if it is bundled up. I need that to be secure and not actually deployed with my client-side app. So one of the big things that functions allow you to do is to bundle together, and Jamstack's all about kind of bundling the best of breed services that you like and love. And so using functions, I can store my API credentials in Gatsby Cloud or wherever you're deploying your functions, and all of that happens magically on the server, and you don't need to think about setting that up or managing that. So security to me is one of those key differentiators, or the reasons why you would move from, say, like just calling an API directly from your React component to actually calling a function that runs on the server.
And it also lowers your surface of attack, right? There's no huge server that's running there with all of your keys exposed and
That's
anything that can get touched there. That granular control over the function itself really lowers kind of the barrier to entry there, or actually increases the barrier to entry. All right, so we have security. Next up is scaling. I think this one's really important, and quite honestly, as we go through kind of the technology curve, scaling is one of those things that keeps getting better. And you can think about it scaling from a horizontal or a vertical process to a horizontal process. Scaling functions, basically, we're only using the function and only using the compute power that we need at that moment in time. So you can think about it like any other thing in logistics with at moment in time, Kanban. We're literally only asking the server for enough compute power to get that one task done. And as those tasks increase, as the resources increase, we can continue to ask the server for more power to get that done. And then when we don't need it, we spin it down and we're no longer incurring that, which is going to be our next point with affordability. But scaling these functions, we're basically asking the pool and the power of the cloud instead of asking for a virtual private server or again, kind of asking for a finite amount of compute. We're basically telling the cloud that we have an infinite amount, but we just need this one thing run each time. And I think that's where the scaling really comes in with functions versus, let's say, a microservice, where you're still going to really need to be running a container at all times. You're going to be worrying about scaling, even if it's on Heroku auto scaling. There's still the concept of hitting your limits in that small window. Our next point, lowering costs. This one is important, I think, for all of us as we move to the cloud and we see these costs continue to rise. Kind of the promise of on-prem versus cloud maybe not be totally true. I think functions can do a lot there. Once another point, we're only using it as we need it. So we're not paying for a server to sit around idly for a month at a time while we know we only need it for, let's say, 1 day's batch of resourcing. And we really need to manipulate data one day and it's going to spike. Those things we don't have to pay for all month. We're only going to pay for the compute power we're using.
Yep.
On the flip side, it's also going to help us be a little bit more accurate. Again, you're not going to have to pre-buy all these huge server upfront for the year. You don't have to go to AWS and throw down a six-figure check to make sure you're getting enough of your scaling and you're getting enough of a deal with functions. You just kind of go as you need, and you'll be able to measure that as the resourcing hits near instantaneous and almost in a live fashion. And then lastly, boosting developer productivity. You want to talk about this a little bit, Joel, coming from front end and the superpowers you now get with functions?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to this because early in my career, like if you wanted to create an API where you were either sourcing data, manipulating data, accessing a database, whatever it would be, the kinds of things you don't really want to do directly from the browser. If you wanted to do that, you had to like write up your whole own, you know, in my time, I started in the early days of Node, like you had to write up your own like Express server. Maybe you're pulling up a Django server. You have to kind of like bootstrap this entire application. The question always became then like, where the heck do I put this thing, right? So then, okay, so maybe like Dan said, you're getting into, you know, containerized environments and you're setting up a Docker file and okay, now I'm going to deploy it this way, or maybe you're able to kind of put it on a VPS and you're on there and you're running the node process the whole time, or like, you know, there's a whole lot to that. There's orchestration. You have to kind of become a little bit of a DevOps, at least like, you know, novice, you know, like you have to get some of those skills in order to deploy any kind of server-like functionality. But like,
you got to go to Jira. You have to even ask for the server itself. Hey, can I get a server spun up at this location?
Right.
Even those things are like slow you down on your workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember like even I remember the first Slack bot some friends and I tried to make. I think it lasted 2 days because we couldn't like something about the node runner on the VPS we had just like borked and we didn't know and we couldn't find, like just all these things where it's like you're responsible for running them. The whole point of serverless architecture in general, whether it's kind of functions as a service or other aspects of kind of managed services in the serverless world, the whole point of it is like you're passing off that responsibility. And so functions in that same way, like with serverless functions, you're passing off that like infrastructure of running this backend code. Additionally, like and we try to leverage some of the same concepts that folks are familiar with from the Gatsby framework. Like, hey, if you have a file, a JS file in your pages directory, we're going to render that as a route. You don't need to think about that. So very similarly, we took that same approach. There's an API folder within source, and we'll talk about this in the demo, but you just put files in there and we will automatically add that routing for you. When you deploy to Gatsby Cloud, those functions are available for you there on the route based on your file name. So there's no routing layer, there's no configuration. It's just drop files into an API folder and Gatsby and Gatsby Cloud take care of the rest.
And on the like a website, I think this is where we start to see not only front end become back end, but like these websites are becoming much more appy, web appy.
Yep.
You can manipulate data. We can do a lot of the things that web apps were traditionally known for. And as a web developer that is more focused on websites, you can start to bring some of those skills kind of into your bag and start to do some of those back end, more application type things.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like, or my general sense is that like, and this was, I think, true later in my career as a front end developer, was just you continually get pulled into kind of the deeper and deeper part of the stack. And so like something like serverless functions just makes that easier. Like you just don't have to also then become the DevOps, you know, expert. Like you can just deploy your serverless functions and they work.
Exactly. And you can still charge your clients more because you're adding functionality. You're bringing a lot more to the table in this respect without really having to do much more, which is I think super powerful for any front end developer.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so now that we've gone through that, I believe we have some use cases, which is great because we're going to go through some demos of some different ones. But let's just talk about what you can actually do with functions. I think one of the quickest, easiest ones that people around Gatsby have been asking for is just like quick form manipulation, have forms that enter data, can retrieve it, authentication, personalization. We think about this a lot as well. There's some A/B testing capabilities that could now be done with functions. In general, you can just have more personalized and stored things in the browser and on the machine to say hi Dan when I log into a site. Data manipulation, image manipulation. Data manipulation is pretty far reaching. I mean, obviously we'll be working with some databases today, but you can retrieve at will or fetch, add, or delete content in any database. Image manipulation we see a lot too, with taking some images, let's say throwing over a filter, right? All of that can be done with a function, and actually post-process any of that stuff on the fly. Redirects, anything like a URL redirect can always be done with function, which actually we've done in the past here at Gatsby on Gatsby Cloud. And then just in general API creation. Again, all of these are going to be creating routes. So any way you can think about exposing anything in API, you can pretty much do here. Any others that I left off in the short list that you want to talk about before we get to our live demo, Joel?
No, I think the form interactivity, authentication, API creation, those are some of the use cases I've gone deeper on. So today we'll focus on both forms and API creation, and then I'm sure folks can ask questions about some of the other use cases as well.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. So then the last slide here is really, I just wanted to show everyone how static sites and dynamic sites now can work together. This is a quick representation of kind of three, let's say, plugins that we're using on a Gatsby site that are during the build phase. So Shopify, let's say WordPress content, and then a review system. All of those things are using Gatsby Build to get built statically, pre-rendered. So they're going to be optimized insanely fast, just like all of our other Gatsby things. They're going to be on that page when you're there. But the great thing about functions is you can take some of this kind of data, some of this functionality, and make it dynamic. So the Shopify, where it's getting most of the content is getting pre-built in the Gatsby build, Shopify, we can also use functions to then call out, let's say, to a quantity. So as someone checks out, the quantity of that item can then be updated in live. Let's say a new item comes up, we can use a function to go grab that new item that's there and post it to the website itself. It's breaking down these barriers, I think, between static and dynamic, which, as you've seen, has been a big, I think, point that we're trying to convey over the last 3 months with a lot of our upgrades.
Yeah.
All right. So now functions on Gatsby Cloud. Joel, I will leave this here. If you want to control these slides, let me know.
Okay.
I can make you presenter, or I can walk you through this.
Yep, absolutely. So kind of recapping a little bit of what I talked about earlier when we were talking about developer experience, like obviously we're deeply focused on making Gatsby have an extremely friendly, kind of like lightweight developer experience. So to that end, like adding functions to your Gatsby project is just I just like the word just, is adding an API folder to your source folder in your project, and then adding a named JavaScript file with a single export to that. Go ahead and bump to the next slide. I'll kind of walk you through some of the steps here. So you add that express style function, and I'll kind of dive into this when we get into the demo. So add that to your API folder. You can test that locally while running Gatsby Develop, and then you can deploy that to Gatsby Cloud, and that'll be available on any domain that you've added, but also on your gatsbyjs.io domain URL, and it's available at /API. So whatever your file name is, it's then available at the either localhost if you're doing that locally, or on your URL in Gatsby Cloud. So maybe a good time to just kind of jump into the demo and kind of go from there.
Let's do it. All right, let me make you.
So really quickly, if you wanna follow along, I've got the GitHub URL up there that you can follow along with. All right, let me share my screen, and looks like y'all can see it fine. So I've obviously got this up in Gatsby Cloud here, but I want to kind of walk through the project a little bit from the code editor side. So what this project is going to show is how to use a tool called Supabase, which is kind of a backend as a service, and to use Supabase as a kind of backend for your Gatsby site. So in this instance, we're using it to accept form submissions. So we'll do some posts to a route in, or a function in Gatsby Cloud. And then we can go and look at that data in Supabase, but we'll also do a simple like API endpoint. So you can see how you could also pull data once that's been dynamically added to your backend. So, all right, let's dive in here. So really quickly, Gatsby config-wise, I actually don't need this flag. I don't know why I added that in. Nothing special here, no plugins, no flags, no anything. The only thing you need to do is make sure you're on Gatsby 3.7 or higher. That's where you'll get functions packaged right in with your Gatsby project. And they'll run in Gatsby Develop, etc. So to look at some of our examples here, you can see here's my source folder. Is this big enough? Maybe I need to kind of zoom in a little bit. All right, we'll go with that. So here in my source folder in my Gatsby project, I have an API folder, and I've got a couple of JavaScript files. You can also do TypeScript if that's your thing. It's not mine. I'm a little older school, I guess, in that way. But let's look really quickly at a simple route called get responses. So I'm using Supabase is a great tool. I'll just kind of like show a little bit of an overview here. It's a Firebase alternative. It uses Postgres in the back end, open source. So you can kind of pull it, take it with you if you want, but provides some like nice APIs and a nice SDK for both updating data and pulling data. So in this case, in our get responses, I'm using their JavaScript client. I'm adding in my environment variables. You can see I have a .env.development file for all of my local environment variables. And so functions can pull any environment variables that you've added in there. So here I've added a Supabase URL and a Supabase anon key, and that's all I need to then kind of bootstrap this client to then go get data. So here I've created, this is an async function because there is async functionality in the Supabase SDK. And so all I'm doing is I'm pulling from a table called submissions, which I've set up over here. So form submissions, and my table is called submissions. And then I'm just getting everything. And so if there's an error, that should return a 500 and then send that error as JSON. Otherwise, I should set the status to 200 and send the data back as JSON. So if you've worked with Express, this probably seems very familiar. And hopefully if you haven't, it seems, at least, kind of like makes a ton of sense. Basically, the function that we're exporting here, I've called it handler. You can call it whatever you want. You just need to export a single function. There's a request object and a response object. So a request is going to have anything on it that is coming from the client. So if there's a body, if there's anything like that, it'll be coming in on that request object. And then the response is anything that we want to return to the person who's making this request. So it could be the browser or another function or another service. So in this case, actually, let's get this fired up so we can actually see. So Gatsby develop. Hopefully there be no dragons with my live coding here.
Always fun.
Make sure we built our functions. Compiling Gatsby functions. There we go. All right. So it looks like we're ready to go. Got some issues with my. So here's just the site. I've added a little form, and we'll get to that in a second. But now if I go to API/get responses, we get a JSON object that should look very familiar if you've done kind of web-based JSON APIs before. And that's pulling all the data. You see my dog has sent me a few messages here into the database, and it's pulling that back on an API. So I could actually expose this to if I had a mobile app or another site or another application that needed to consume my data, I could actually expose it through this API and have folks come and get that. So that's a pretty simple get endpoint. We want to do something a little bit more complicated, like let's say we wanted to add a form to a Gatsby site. Here we could do something very, very similar. So I again bootstrap my Supabase client, get it all set with my keys, and then here I'm actually parsing the rec.body. So anything that's coming into my function, I'm parsing that out and handling it with this submission. I'm actually console logging, so we can see some logging information. And then again, I'm using the Supabase client, but here I'm actually inserting the data that's been sent over to me from across this function. And then again, similar if error returned, but I'll return the data there. So how does this look when it comes to like, so okay, this is great. We can kind of look at this very similar to the other one, but it's an insert. So then we can use this over in our function file. So let me just kind of pull the terminal down because there's maybe a little bit more going on. So here I have a pretty normal-ish form, which we looked at on that page over here. So if we just go back to /API or localhost here. So we have a name, email, message, pretty vanilla contact form. So here I've got all of those. I'm managing state on each input. So for name, email, message, I'm using that to then set just a single piece of state, which then once we hit our submit button, so once we handle the submit of the form, we'll actually we'll hit that endpoint. So /API/submit form, which is based on our file name over here, set the method to post, and then we'll actually stringify that state, send it across, and then once we get that data, then we'll set submitted true, which will return our submission complete state. So let's see that. Let's actually see that working. So I'm gonna send another message from my dog, my faithful companion, who I don't see with me right now, but that's all right. So Bella@woof.com, please bring more treats upstairs the next time you go to the kitchen. So then I'll click submit, moment of truth here. And that's telling me thank you. So I'm assuming that's good. And if we go over here to Supabase and look at our GUI for our database, as that's loading up, there we have that message that was just sent. Send that treats next time you go. So we've submitted that, we've handled the form, and that's all done using the backend functionality that we just did there. So if we pull that back up, we'll get our get responses. And there we go. We've got that additional message in our API endpoint. All right. That's a pretty simple but like pretty common use case, handling form submissions, getting data back, handling some state in that way. So let's maybe take a pause there and ask if there are any other questions. I guess, oh, sorry. One other thing I did want to show, when that runs in Gatsby Cloud, one of the kind of harder pieces of running serverless infrastructure is that like you can't necessarily just log into a server and look at logs. So we have included on each build that you do, any functions that run on that URL. This is our currently published one, so it's actually running on this URL right here. So any functions that are invoked against that URL, you'll get a log. I think keep them for about 12 hours. It might be 24, but let's say 12 because I think that's correct. And so you can see anytime that I call get responses, which I don't think we've logged yet. So let's actually do that really quickly here. If we go to change out this URL for Supabase functions.gatsbyjs.io/ and let's add that in. Let's see if that worked on the fly there. Okay, so we called that function. Let's call it a couple of times. You see some caching as well. Great, so there you see our initial function was called as a 200, but then you can see that because it was cached through the CDN layer with Fastly, we're actually getting a nice cached response to that. So it's not necessarily having to invoke it every time. And I think the stale Laravel validate time is, excuse me, about 60 seconds on that. So in another minute here, we would get a fresh 200. All right, that's I think a good place to potentially stop for now. So let's maybe open it up for any questions that folks might have about kind of this example or functions in general.
Yeah, we have a few questions. Actually, it's funny you started that because the first one I was going to throw out was around logging and where we can see logs. Are the logs actually Are the logs appended to each build? Are they attached to a workspace? Where can we find those?
Yeah, so they are attached to a specific build that is like currently live on a URL. So you could test it on if you're using, I don't have any pull request builds up right now, but if you had a pull request build up, you could use that URL. Say you were like testing out a new function and you had that on a pull request. you could access that URL /API, whatever, and then you could look at the logs just for that specific build by clicking in again to the build details page here, where you'll then get, like, you can view your build logs and all of that, but then your function logs will be there on any build that includes functions. And then you get your kind of invocation count here that's appropriate to your plan on Gatsby Cloud.
All right, awesome. All right, does Gatsby handle, do functions handle notifications for a form submission, or would that be on the Supabase side?
That's a good question. I mean, you can have it include any kind of notifications, right? So you could have in here, like once that comes back as data and that's positive, you could add anything you wanted in here. So some of the other examples we've done Twilio, we've done like SendGrid. So you can actually access this in the main Gatsby.js repo now. Not .com, I want, sorry, GitHub. And then if you just go to the main Gatsby repo, in our examples folder here, we now have a bunch of functions examples. So you could send notifications via email with SendGrid. You could send them via text message. You kind of do whatever you wanted there. One thing that I think is Supabase specific is there is like data update subscriptions you could do. So you could actually have a subscription that then called and sent out messages to whoever you wanted once that data is like correctly added. So it just depends at which point in the process you want to do it. Like you could do it here in your function, or you could write a separate function that you call on some kind of subscription to that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. All right, quick logging question again. During Gatsby develop console logging responses and requests, do they get logged locally the same way that they're logged in Gatsby Cloud?
Yep. So, I think I lost my terminal here, unfortunately. Let's see. So when you're running this, they will. This is gonna be angry at me. I think I've lost it. Got a zombie terminal somewhere. Yeah. So it should. Oops. Let's see here. I think I do want to hit yes that time. Yes. All right, that's not letting me run it, but it will log out locally in your like your local terminal. Maybe run it over here. Here it is. Yeah. So okay, this should actually have the example of our submission. So when we submitted, so I had that console log here in submit form, and that then console log that out, and you'll also get that in Gatsby Cloud. It'll show it in that log there as well. Yep.
All right. Do Gatsby functions allow users to have a logged in state? Like might be done with sessions and PHP, which lets the logged in user see different content on the site than a non-logged in user. Was this possible in Gatsby before serverless functions?
There were probably ways that you could do it using cookies and that sort of thing, but you would have to have used kind of like another backend or like another service for calling that. That's totally possible now. So you can do that with storing sessions in a cookie.
Yeah, we had a little contest here internally about who could build the best little serverless app. And actually my team, we built a little MySpace. So we all had our own little page. So it was just like any other app that had a logged in state. We used Google Auth for it and it worked beautifully. So it's pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah. So that's where, yeah, you can use Auth and start to create kind of personalized full app sort of functionality. So, yep.
All right. Does serverless function, do they bypass CORS? How does it work with CORS?
Yes.
Someone here was trying to use Fetch and Axios and ran into a CORS problem.
Right. It does avoid it because it's all coming from the same URL. So like you'll notice in my form example here, I'm just fetching from /API. So that's going to append that to my base URL. So HTTPS localhost or my Gatsby.js URL that I was showing earlier. It'll just append it to that, which avoids the CORS problem, which, yeah, that's, boy, what a headache, right? Which was the value of monolithic applications early on. Then you get into like separate front ends, separate back ends, and it became a bit of a headache, and you're always having to pass stuff around. this bypasses that, and because they're originating from the same URL.
All right. Dan, we have a security question. How do you protect that GET response endpoint with authentication once it's live?
Yep. So I believe, don't quote me on this, but Kyle and I were playing around with some stuff where you can use like middleware to then check if somebody's authenticated. So you can protect those endpoints by doing an authentication check using kind of any other middleware that you might use for that.
All right. And then the last question is, well, maybe not the last, but I think we're coming. One of the strongest features of Gatsby is the built-in image optimization. If we pull in images post-build via function, are we still going to have those same optimizations?
That's
actually a great question.
That's a great question. Oh, I wish Grayson was here. I know he's done some stuff with like kind of testing out some stuff with like basically server-side rendering with some Gatsby components. I will say kind of out of the box, no. You'd have to do a lot of that optimization yourself, which is doable like on the server side. But most of where that happens is within the component itself and within the business logic of the component that we ship. So we haven't added a similar server side kind of version of that yet for functions, but boy, what a great idea for the roadmap. So thank you, whoever asked that.
All right. Do you have any, I think we're coming to an end here, which is perfectly on time. I thought this was an awesome demo, Joel. Thank you for showing us what functions can do. And I think based on the questions, I think people are starting to see how dynamic Gatsby is able to be now with the addition of this.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you have any other questions, anybody here, feel free to reach out on Twitter. We'll be active there. We can get back to you. Also, feel free to let us know what you're building with Gatsby functions. Well, we're super interested about that as well.
Yep, absolutely. Let's see here. There was one other question.
Yeah.
So somebody asked about what is the kind of connection between Gatsby Cloud and other platforms. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Like Gatsby's open source. Like we've always been open source, and plenty of people have built like really wonderful businesses on top of that. And so and I do believe Netlify already built a converter to make Gatsby yeah, difference. There we go. So you know, basically the difference is that on Gatsby Cloud, like there's just no additional packages, no extra builds. It's just all baked in. It just works. It's kind of, you know, we optimized it to take functions with all of the things that you can do with it and make them work, you know, kind of without limit. So what that means is like, as we add things like binary support and like other interesting use cases and like kind of like extensibility, that's going to be baked into Gatsby Cloud. That's the main difference, I think, between us and other platforms that are doing it. And Ian, I saw your question about the Git repo. Yeah, it's available. I tweeted it. So if you're on Twitter, you can go to the Gatsby.
Oh, look at this plug. Joel's just plugging himself here.
No, well, I'm just saying there's a quote tweet on that. There's a repo. Also, also, yeah, there you go. Thanks whoever answered that in the chat. Also, yeah, you can check out the example repos in the main Gatsby repo. There's a bunch of stuff in there, authentication, like some interesting stuff, even interacting with like the Gmail API and Twilio and all sorts of cool stuff. So yeah, thanks for that question. And most of our examples right now are on GitHub, so that's the best place to check that out.
They're on GitHub, and actually, if you check out GatsbyJS.com and go to the product section, and if you click on the functions dropdown, the examples are actually linked from the marketing page. So quick place to get it real quick. You'll get most of the main ones right there on GatsbyJS.com. Yeah, if you
I can pull that up real quick. Yep, I think you'll see we've got most of those use cases kind of listed out here, so you can see some of those.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Awesome, everyone. I appreciate everyone showing up today. And Joel, thank you so much again for a stellar demo.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.